Octopus.
So I can go. This presentation is called Greetings. Yeah, my name is Bethuel Muthee. I'm a poet based in Nairobi, and it's a pleasure to be part of the Gamification versus Play Symposium. My presentation is titled Potea Catching Up with the Present. Potea can be loosely translated to mean you find, you lose, finding and losing. So it's a play on, it's a game. So I will just briefly go into what the presentation is. Can we please go to the next slide? So the next slide after this. So I think I'll give a bit of context of where this is coming from, and this is going to be a brief history of Nairobi. We can go to the next slide. So Nairobi as a place, as a city, as a town, came to be as a result of the construction of the Uganda Railway. This happened between 1896 to 1900, 1902. And Nairobi was the place where they rested before going up the escarpments, the Rift Valley escarpments. So it was a place of rest. Before it was called Nairobi, it was called Nakuso Intelon, which is a Maasai word or phrase meaning the beginning of beauty. Because of the acacias that were there, it was a swampy area, and from the highlands, from the higher land places where the Maasai were, they could see the light that went through and hit the trees, and it was called the beginning of beauty. It became called Nairobi officially on Tuesday, 3rd October 1899, by order of George Whitehouse, who was the chief engineer of the Uganda Railways. So the photo you see is the early settlement, just a small settlement around the railways depot where people that grew out and became a city. So over time, it became an urban center with people coming in from different places. Before the construction of the railway, there had been a rinderpest outbreak, which had caused a lot of massive loss of lives of cattle and disrupted the way of life of many people, since livestock was something that was there as social. That was how you would get bride price. That was a means of exchange. And lacking that, then a lot of things fell into disarray. Nairobi, from there, has changed over time. I'm sorry for that dog. And from there, Nairobi became an urban center that was very segregated. Towards the hills, where it was green, that was where the railway heads, the officials lived. In the lowlands towards the east is where the Africans lived, and in the middle around the bazaar is where the Asians were settled. The Indians would come in as construction workers. So we can go to the next slide. Nairobi became a city in 1950, and this is a photo of Delamere Avenue, which now is called Kenyatta Avenue. In 1950, this is just prior the city charter celebrations, which were done on March 30th, 1950. So around that time, there was quite some resistance to the city, because a lot of people who were coming into the city were people who had been displaced because their land had been expropriated by the colonial powers, settlers. And so a lot of people, the city was becoming more and more congested with less and less facilities. And there had been a plan in 1948 that made the city now very fixed in its form in terms of segregation and certain sides of people having different sides. And we can go to the next slide. And Nairobi has successively got a regime of non-planning, selective non-planning, where certain people in the community have been left out and completely ignored. And Nairobi now is hurtling towards world-class city status. I think it's an aspiration to be considered one of those places in the world that can match anywhere else. But a lot of this comes with borrowing and not much of in terms of like architectural styles that is truly ours. And we can go to the next slide, please. This is Jogoo Road, one of the main roads into Eastlands, which is where a lot of people live, given that the city has been divided in a certain fixed form. Towards the west, you have the green, the lush, leafy suburbs. Eastlands is the plains, much drier, and where a lot of people are. Rent is cheaper, but also in terms of facilities and infrastructure, it's also a place that's quite ignored until it's campaign time. So we can go next. So Nairobi has also been touted to be the Silicon Savannah. It's been a hub. It has been a commercial hub for a long time in East Africa. And because of this, access to different companies, startups have been brought into the region. And so Nairobi has been touted as the Silicon Savannah. And my question is, these automated dreams, this neoliberal dream, there's a Vision 2030, which imagines certain provisions, and there was even the construction of the smart city, Konza City, whose construction started 13 years ago, and to this year it's still a construction site. So at what expense is this happening? And those are the questions I've been asking. Dr. Wangoi Kimari speaks about the ruins and ruinations that are happening. That is not just a process, but also a political project that leaves some people completely ignored or outside the radar of legality. And so the law is able to harass them and they cannot go to the law. So that is the situation. That is just a bit of background into Nairobi from where I'm speaking, and at least this is where certain things are happening, which I will be speaking about. We can go to the next slide. So Potea. Potea is a popular street game. It's a scam that is played in downtown Nairobi. It's a 3-card trick where you have to choose which card you're going to pick. You pick a card, they shuffle them, and you're asked to pick your card. So there's a crowd of people there. Most times there's the guy who's dealing, but there are also other people who are part of the team. And so when you come in, if you do not know, the first few rounds they let you win. And so you patter. And when you you make something, and now the stakes become higher. And because you've been winning, you're just like, I know this game. The more you play, the stakes get higher, the more you start losing, because they know there's a scam, there's a trick that they know. It's considered illegal by local authority, but it's currently, they still do it because people have found ways of being able to be mobile. There's going to be someone on the lookout for the city council or county officials. And so I think this is the part of the presentation I'm going to be going into, talking about the question of gambling, debt, and their relation to what is happening and what can we speculate. We can go to the next slide. Those are 3 cards, just like they use in Potea. We can go to the next slide. So yesterday, the Kenya budget was presented to Parliament. This is the final budget from this sitting, the government in power, since next year is an election year. I about to this because as we speak more credit, Kenya as a country has been in the past 9 years had a ballooning debt. In the past few months, Kenyans on Twitter who are very tenacious and always ready to defend their rights and talk and bully anyone were petitioning the IMF to not give Kenya loans because they could feel the pressure of having to the debt burden has become too much, and the government tries to repay this debt by having higher taxes. So this is pushed onto the consumer, and so things have become quite expensive. So this is our Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani yesterday before he headed to Parliament present this budget. Can go to the next slide. This is a 3.6 trillion Kenya shillings budget. It's quite a big. This is a huge budget, and of this, the revenue that is going to be raised is going to be less than 2 trillion. So the rest is going to be serviced by debt. And there's the people here who see the hit list, motorcyclists, bread, which is something that people use, petroleum gas that people use every day to cook, jewelry, mining, nicotine products, commercial banks, punters, and betting. So life is already expensive given that this is a pandemic. This is the period of a pandemic. So people have lost jobs. And now basic things like food and gas are going to be taxed more. And the question of betting has been brought before Parliament several times in budget as a way because it took hold when it came in, and it's coming in a big way. A lot of people are caught in gambling. It's become a normal thing. So we can go to the next slide. This is a graph that at least shows what has happened in the past 9 years in terms of Kenya's debt levels. And in terms of revenue, our revenue is not growing as much, but we have a massive deficit. The reason for this is the government right now, led by President Uhuru Kenyatta, has been working towards a very capital-intensive infrastructure projects since they came into power in a capital deficit economy. So when that has had to be plugged in by internal borrowing from banks and bonds, but there's also been borrowing from commercial banks out there, the Eurobond, and also in other financial institutions, multilateral agreements and such. And these projects include the railway, the SGR, standard gauge railway, which was one of the flagship projects of the first term of the president. And so it has continued growing. The thing is, it would be better if this debt, that we would see something coming out of it. And indeed we can. There are roads being under construction across the country, but also there are massive allegations of corruption. Money that was supposed to be used for public good services has been diverted to people's pockets. This question of debt as a country plays out also in homesteads, because a lot of people cannot be able to meet ends meet. They go back to borrowing. But in the past, there were other forms where it was more community, a certain peer-to-peer. You know someone at the corner shop, so you have an agreement if they know you and they can trust you that if you can stay for a month or a few weeks and pay. So that was there. But now with technology, there has been an exponential growth of mobile loan apps. I think we can go to the next slide. loans take it quickly. So right now you have access to loans at the swipe of a finger and opening an app, download. And so what has happened is there are people who have as many as 10 mobile loan apps. And some of these apps, people join without even considering what information they're giving away. So they are popular, and you can get the loan and you're supposed to repay in a certain short period. But also the interest charged compared to commercial banks is exorbitant. It is just, it's punitive almost, one would say, because the interest rate charged on a loan of 3,000, I think it's like you have to pay 30 bob a day, 30 shillings for that. So the longer that takes before you can pay back. So a lot of people, once you've been blocked on one app, you delete it and move to the next. So part of that has been like, and it's available on even text. All you need is CHEZA means enable or make it happen. And all you need is to text USSD code and you have access to money and pay back. And even companies like Safaricom and M-Pesa, which is M-Pesa is probably one of the most prominent things that has given the impression of the Silicon Savannah. The transformative money transfer system that lets people have access to money and transfer, and now you can have savings or even take out a loan. That too is very expensive. So a lot of people, because of their daily pressures, you cannot sustain yourself on the salary you have, you resort to taking out a loan. And this credit has something that some of these apps, for example, if you're not able to pay, they have permission. They go through your texts or call logs, and they find out who are the people who you communicate with most often. And so the people you talk to most, your family, whoever, will be hounded on your bill because until they pay and the people are sure they get their money back. So it becomes, some people don't get sleep. You almost change numbers because now there's too much pressure. Everyone around you is being called if you haven't paid. And they really use a lot of pressure. And so you're also blacklisted from the credit ratings bureau. So you can't access more credits, which makes things doubly difficult. You can go to the next slide. So something related to this is CHEZA ka wewe. CHEZA ka wewe means play like yourself, play like who you are, be yourself. It's been popularized by a song by a guy called Trio Mio. So CHEZA ka wewe, something that has also come in a big way is sports betting. And so you have SportsPesa, 1xBet. There are various betting apps, and also for that, people have more than one. And to broaden what could be the result. And so this has become, I think in the past 5 or 6 years, one of the biggest things that changed a lot. Like, I remember a few years ago meeting some guys who were like, before this thing became big, we used to do it in university and we'd be losing our school fees and try and making it back. But right now it's massive advertising. In 2019, sports betting advertising beat government advertising. And this is the first time because government is a huge spend on advertising in terms for jobs and all those things in the press. But sports betting they were able to sponsor the National League. They've been able to sponsor teams. And so the failings of the government to be able to provide certain things to culturally, even like sports, taking care of things like that, made people go into betting. And so when betting was, it's come over time, and so people now are getting, sorry, just a minute. So, excuse me. So yes, sports betting has become a way of life for some people. When I walk around and I listen to people, or I watch people, I observe. There are places people in the morning, because there's a page in the newspaper where you can find the listings, or like where you can do the odds. There are people who print that and share it. There are people who almost do it like a club. We will do it communally. So what do you think? What do you think? What do we? So they make a consensus, and so if there's a loss, it comes back to someone sometimes, like, you're the one who told us to choose this. I had a feeling it wasn't going to be that way, the outcome. So it's become a way people are able to, again, just like the mobile loans, for people to be able to make up for what they cannot be able to find because of the situation of how things are. Amongst like the people, there was a show on the BBC World Service in which there were a group of university students who were asked what it meant for them to get into sports betting. And some of them even said their parents encouraged them because they were not able to send enough pocket money. They would even send for whatever is needed for the bet. And so it's become a culture that people are doing it even in families, like people sit and that's what they do. We can go to the next slide. This is a betting shop in town where people can come and watch games that are happening, and there's live betting. So there are people who spend their day there, and good punters, and predicting and working and trying to figure out what will go next. That can go next. So I think I will think about, let us speculate. And speculation, what do I understand by speculation? I think it's a way of seeing, but I think I'll use Stephen Shaviro, who writes, I think, about speculative realism and puts it into two kinds of groups. He talks about the open speculation and closed speculation. There's open speculation is the kind that is almost emancipatory, that works towards making certain futures or finding things different. So this is something that can be found in things like speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, and other forms where people are able to imagine differently. And there's a closed kind of speculation that can be related to financial speculation, which is people, it's almost like problem gambling reproduced and reinforced at the scale of the capitalist system. So financial speculation says that it creates wealth, that it makes markets, and these are generative things. But what financial speculation does is create more of itself. And by doing this, it makes like there's no horizon. There's an indefinite replication of the future as the present, or a present of returns, which is a form of enclosing the future. So we can go to the next slide. And so, yeah, I give like in the form of open speculation, think of the work of someone like Octavia Butler or science fiction in general, that allows us to imagine different futures and different scenarios. And then you have the closed speculation of the markets. You can go to the next slide. So this is where I think I try and have a synthesis of the things I have talked about. So there's been Nairobi, it's history of selective non-planning, and not just Nairobi, but I would say of Kenya in general, but I will speak of Nairobi since that is what I am absolutely sure. And due to this, there has been a breakdown in social relations, and also that has something to do with technology, a certain kind of playing. So now the question is, for me, I think the whole idea of this presentation is kind of a space to allow us to imagine, to think, and there's no definite goal apart from like a space to speculate. So if Nairobi, because of, I got interested in the notion of how debt and credit is available and what gambling is doing. There are people who take out loans from the apps to be able to gamble. And so there's the gaps in what people are able to make, but also what has the introduction of this technology that allows people to have access to a kind of prediction. When you take out credit, your hope, the assumption is that in the future you will be able to pay back whatever you borrowed, in fact, with even more, the interest. So in this kind of that idea of the future, you almost know the future, because if you know that you'll have this, it's just like, okay, good. But the gambling is almost the same thing, where you think the future is already guaranteed, it's fixed, I can predict that this will happen, and if I do this with a certain kind of accuracy repeatedly, then that will change things. So that has been an interesting question. And I came across the speculative time complex, which is something I've read from Amin Abvenesian and Suhail Malik. This was in this magazine in, I think, 2016, and I find it quite interesting. For them, they say time is changing, and we're not just living in a new time or an accelerated time, but time itself, the direction of time, has changed. We no longer have a linear time in the sense of a past being followed by the present and then the future. It's rather the other way around. The future happens before the present, time arrives from the future. And so when we're talking about closed speculation, we talk about this idea that all it does is reproduce itself, and that it's an indefinite replication of the future as the present. We've staked so much on the future that the present is not there, or the present is hedged in by some kinds of future. It's enclosed, which means also that we enclose an alternative future, another kind of future that could be there apart from this one that is coming back towards us. And so I try and ask myself, so the present is shaped by the future, and then these are drawings by Andreas Stopfer, which were part of the article by Suhail Malik and Venetian. So how does debt, how does credit and gambling, what does that do for our understanding of the future? I have to say that I am not anyone with any experience in finance. I come to this as an artist, a poet, and so I also try and speculate, make my own speculations. I think I'm almost winding up to allow for the next presentation. But so what is the place of language, and how can language make us understand our present? Franco Bifo Berardi talks about the question of semi-inflation. We live in a world where there's too much information, to be too many signs and very little meaning. And for this, he suggests poetry as a way of awakening the social body. And so, as I've been thinking about this in relation to games and play, I was trying to see what are the ways that one could use poetry to simulate and stimulate a kind of different kind of play, different kind of outcomes. Because when one is playing a game, it's quite similar to theater. There's a scenography, you have the set, the scene, and you do not have time to narrate. You're not narrating what is happening, but making things. So how can we make differently given what is happening and beat this other system of speculation that seems to be stealing our sense of the present, because we're always looking out to a certain kind of future that either is coming. Mark Fisher famously said that there is no future. It's right now in this period where we live with its melancholy and the pressures of capitalist realism. There is almost no alternative. And so I think that is where we live off this speculation. How can we use different forms of, by poetry, I think I'm using it broadly, not just language-based arts, but arts, all forms of making and consciousness that we have. How can they be used to create different scenarios, simulate different scenarios where we can imagine differently and shape a whole different conception of time. And I think that is all I have for today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bethuel. Next will be Oscar Peña about creating good jobs through technology, and see you later in the discussion.